Greetings, classicists, and welcome to Book 8 of the Odyssey, the Phaeacian Games, everyone's favourite book. Or is it book 5? Or is it book 6? Is it Meme's favourite book? Who knows? Meme, what's your favourite book? Well, we'll see. Maybe the one where the dog dies. Anyway, so, what a little starter. Again, nothing conceptual. Don't worry. What do these events have in common? So you've got throwing the discus, you've got wrestling, and you have got running. What do they all have in common? Have a look at the pictures and see what you think. Well, as students invariably point out, they're all naked, and that is a fundamental principle, if you like, of Greek athletics, because you want to show off your muscular body, which emphasizes your personal discipline and the favor of the gods. So yes, that's certainly one thing in an athletic sense. More about the purpose of athletics. Any thoughts? Well, I'm sure you've got it. If not, here's the answer. The simple fact is that athletics are a preparation for war. For the Greeks, they are practicing the skills that you need to be good in battle. So running is a crucial part of warfare. One of the most important epithets that Achilles has, the greatest warrior in the world, is swift-footed Achilles. So running is absolutely crucial. Throwing a discus or a javelin is pretty obviously preparation for throwing rocks and throwing spears in warfare, a crucial part of warfare in Homer's time and throughout the ancient world. Wrestling is again, grappling with someone who is attempting to kill you in battle. Maybe your sword's been broken or lost and you're trying to subdue someone with your hands. So all of these things are clear, relevant and direct skills for warfare. So being good at athletics means you are good at warfare, and generally vice versa. A hero would be expected to be very good at athletics because of his skill in war. So there's a circular idea, if you like. So to suggest that someone is not good at athletics is to suggest they are not a warrior and therefore not a hero. And this idea is backed up by a good quote from George Orwell, who said that sport is war minus the shooting. And I think a Homeric hero would have really understood that and agreed with that as a statement, as a concept. They would have understood, the real competitive battle side to athletics and sport. They may not have understood team sports, though. That would have been something a little bit more complicated for a Homeric hero to understand. As you can see, they often don't really play very well together. So there we go. Yes, as I was saying, athletics are a practice for war, and sport fundamentally equals heroic. So sport and athletics is important, and in terms of creating a heroic identity, but it also harks back to one of the core scenes in the Iliad, the very end of the Iliad, and that is the funeral games of Patroclus. Remember, he'd been killed by Hector. That sent Achilles into a psychopathic rage. Achilles kills Trojans and Hector and desecrates Hector's body. Finally, Priam begs Achilles for his son's body back, and then the Iliad ends with Achilles burying Patroclus and all of these heroes taking part in funeral games. So this is a direct throwback, if you like, or reference to the Iliad, and that is the literary idea of intertextuality, which is something that Homer uses a lot. These two stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey are woven together with appropriate effects. So what precisely is intertextuality and how does it work? So this is a definition I plundered off the internet, which I thought was rather good. So intertextuality is recognizing and understanding, you know what I mean, you can read. Recognizing and understanding intertextuality leads to a much richer reading experience which invites new interpretations as it brings another context, idea, story into the text at hand. As new layers of meaning are introduced, there is pleasure in the sense of connection and the continuity of texts and of cultures. So I think that's a great thing to think about with regard to intertextuality. As you're reading the Odyssey, you're reminded of the Iliad, and all the emotions you felt when you're reading the Iliad are brought in to the Odyssey, sometimes supported, sometimes as contrast. And that contrast is actually quite important with the Odyssey, because it could very much be argued that the nature of heroism explored in the Iliad is somewhat subverted in the Odyssey. And you could argue that it's not. But that's definitely an argument that's brought forward. These glorious heroes on the battlefield who are constantly shouting their name and identifying themselves and fighting for wealth and honor is quite different to Odysseus, who fundamentally is by himself, disguising his identity and fighting to get back to his household. And he makes decisions that diminish his identity in part. So there's sort of theories, if you like, that the Odyssey is a little bit of a counter reaction to the heroes of the Iliad in terms of what people should be. But anyway, we'll have a look at those ideas a bit later on. So once again, a chance to gain kleos for your family and friends with the Book 8 test. Do it under timed conditions, because again, you need that practice of working under pressure. And don't look at the book when you're doing it, obviously. Then when you've finished, go through the book and look for the answers. And that's a crucial part of the activity, is working out the answers for yourself through research, through trying to find the right passage, through interacting with text. So make sure you're self-marking, make sure you're giving yourself a realistic mark. I'm not going to ask for them in because some of you, even though there's no need, will cheat, but this is guidance for you. You need to be getting 70% plus as the pass mark, and really you should be getting 8 or 9 out of 10 to consider yourselves to be doing well. And this is based on experience. When students have sat the exams and done well, I've gone back and looked at their marks, and I know the level of knowledge required to succeed. So if you're not hitting these pass marks, it's necessary that you do more work trying to memorize key aspects of the text. So going back over the questions that go with the books, asking yourself those questions again, taking your own notes. The questions are supposed to be a support structure for all of the things that you really should be picking out of the text. But if that's not working for you, then you still have to do them, but you'll have to think about what other strategies you can adopt for the tests. There will be a sort of super big test on everything probably after half term, which will be books 1 to 12, but I'll confirm that a bit later on. But yeah, and that I will take the results in and look at them quite carefully. But this is, if things were normal, this would be guidance for me in class, but they're not quite. So at the moment, this is guidance for you. Are you on the right track? And I'm sure you are. So 3 minutes, off you go. Brilliant. Well done. Right, so diving into book 8, and we have some very significant events at the beginning, almost at the very beginning. We have Athene, who appears in disguise and summons the Phaeacians to assembly. And this might seem, in a sense, like a strange thing for Athene to do. Why is she summoning the Phaeacians to assembly? Why is that an important intervention? Why is she bothering? Does it matter? Well, of course it matters, because by attending this assembly where Odysseus will be and listening to Odysseus speak and appreciating Odysseus, he is gaining kleos that he has lost through his time on Calypso's island. He is being recognized once more, although precisely who he is isn't clear at this point. So from a Homeric perspective, this is quite an important intervention of Athene, but from our perspective, it doesn't seem that relevant. Why does Odysseus care who's listening to his story? This is also quite important in a sense, in that it puts pressure on Alcinous to give the best Xenia possible to Odysseus. He is now having to perform in front of a crowd and show that he is a great man by providing immaculate Xenia in the form of food, drink, games, and gifts afterwards. Think back to Book 7 when Alcinous makes a suggestion of Xenia, but it's not clear what he's going to provide. And as we see throughout 7 and 8, we see the gifts and the prestige of Odysseus increase and increase and increase, especially as he starts telling his story, which hints then at perhaps Odysseus being a little manipulative. But we'll come on to that later on. So how good is Alcinous' Xenia? Well, one could argue it's already pretty good, but at the beginning again, he defines himself by the quality of his Xenia. He says, no man ever received poor Xenia from the Phaeacians. So we see Alcinous maybe a little silly, a bit hasty, not always especially aware of what's going on, but he understands the importance of Xenia, and he provides, one might argue, the best Xenia that he can. So that certainly defines him as civilized, and one might argue heroic as well, although he's not the same type of hero as Odysseus and Menelaus and Achilles, for one important reason that will come clear later on, perhaps, in that he's never really fought. And I don't know if you'd spotted that about the Phaeacians, but they don't seem to have these tales of warfare, because since they were chased away from the land of the Cyclops, they've been in this land that doesn't really seem to have much connection to the outside world. Their ships will take them to trade and sail, but they seem to have few, if any, sort of enemies in the land itself. So, just a sort of quick reminder: take note of what Alcinous is offering in this speech. It's a ship and help with the onward journey. There's not much mention of any significant treasure, and just keep a careful eye on how that builds, as I was saying, throughout the rest of the next 5 books, including this one. So, Odysseus and Alcinous are sitting around, and Alcinous brings in, if you like, Demodocus, the bard. Now, there's some suggestions that this is actually Homer. It's a blind bard playing stories for an audience, and he's sort of written himself into the text. And so when the Phaeacians treat the bard well, that's Homer as the bard sort of hinting to his audience that they should give him, food and drink and a place to sit and great respect. So, who knows? It's a nice idea. Probably not going to come up in any significant kind of exam question, but it's an interesting thought nonetheless, that you might be experiencing the thoughts and feelings and manipulations of the poet himself. Anyway, he tells this interesting story of Troy, and one of the stories of Troy is the great argument between Odysseus and Achilles, and this argument was necessary as part of a prophecy that Troy would only fall once the two greatest heroes had this argument. So this is an interesting story and a very significant story because of the response of Odysseus. Odysseus starts crying, and there's a number of reasons why he may be crying, not necessarily all bad. So on the face of it, yes, he may well be crying because he is reminded of the heroic life that he once had, where he was leading armies at Troy with his allies, with his men, all of whom are now dead or lost, or certainly gone from his knowledge. He's aware that his men are all dead at this point. So absolutely there will be great sadness in being reminded at who he once was. However, there's a positive spin that you could put on this. He may be crying with relief as well, because Odysseus, he's been on Calypso's island for 7 years. He was with Circe for 1. He's been really beyond human contact for more or less 10 years, which is a huge amount of time in any world, but especially in the ancient world, when you don't live to 80, you live till 40, 50 if you're lucky. So as a proportion of a life, that is massive. And in a society where it just depends on you being there and reinforcing your identity and sort of public persona, it's an insanely long period of time. So Odysseus could be crying because his Kleos is not dead. He's with these strange people. They're singing songs to entertain a guest. What song do they choose? They choose a song of Odysseus. His Kleos still exists. He is still a hero. He's still spoken of. So there could be, there's almost certainly an element of sadness, but there could also be an element of relief that his heroic identity has not been completely lost to the wider world. So Alcinous sees that Odysseus is weeping and no one else notices. And Alcinous understands that something has been said or done to upset Odysseus. And so he shows excellent Xenia here. He's trying not to further increase the suffering of his guest. And so he suggests instead that they go outside and witness the games. So another little characterization of Alcinous. He may not be the sharpest or the most military minded or anything much, but he's good at Xenia. He understands the needs of his guests, as he should. So we have the games, and we have all the various races and a little bit of excitement, and it would have, as we said before, made people think of the games of the Iliad. It is also an important sign of a civilized society where people are coming together to practice for the skills of warfare, to practice self-restraint and discipline and order, and it's a communal event, it's a communal experience, which again is quite an important concept in society. You have these civic things, you have games, you have sacrifices, you have assemblies where people get together. Now, during these games, Euryalus does sort of show us a significant breach in Xenia, if you like. He's trying to persuade Odysseus to take part in them, and Odysseus refuses because for a whole variety of reasons. He's probably exhausted. He doesn't yet completely trust the Phaeacians. He's still trying to work out precisely who they are and what they're about. He may also be nervous about giving himself away because he doesn't want to reveal his identity unless he's sure that it's safe to do so. And as one of the great heroes, taking part in athletics would and crushing everyone else would probably suggest who he was, or certainly the type of person that he was. So Euryalus suggests that Odysseus is a merchant captain, a great insult, in effect saying you are not a sportsman, you are not a hero, you are not a warrior, you are not worthy in a sense of the Xenia that's being offered to you and the status that we seem to have conferred on you. And this is a crushing insult to a hero. And Odysseus clearly almost loses it and does what a hero should when your honor is threatened, and kill the person who has done it. So Euryalus doesn't realize quite how close he's come to death, but Odysseus restrains himself from doing it. And restraint and disguise is such an important part of Odysseus and his personality, certainly by this point. And as I've said before, when you see the Odyssey in chronological order, you can see where actually broadcasting his name has got him into trouble, and that restraint is necessary in many ways for survival in the past, and it certainly will be in the future. Remember, when he goes back to Ithaca, he mustn't broadcast his name because he will be killed by the suitors. So this is actually a dangerous situation, and this is again where Athene intervenes and helps out. So Odysseus takes a discus and flings it further than the Phaeacians can possibly sort of imagine, that real kind of whirring, spinning giant stone frisbee, if you like, a real sign that he is a hero, he is a significant individual. And here Athene joins in again and pretends to be part of the crowd and says, look, that is an amazing throw, what a great throw, thus channeling all the kleos onto Odysseus and calming him down. You know, the Phaeacians have now acknowledged his heroic identity, even if they don't know his name. So again, to us, a slightly strange intervention by Athene, but for a hero and for Odysseus, who's trying not to lose control and break his disguise, actually potentially quite an important intervention. So Odysseus then goes on to further talk about a story and express his virtues and abilities. Maybe comes close to slipping up with the story or the reference to Philoctetes and his bow, because he says that Philoctetes was the only archer better than me. I was a hero at Troy. And you know, anyone with a knowledge of the Trojan War would understand that that meant that he's probably Odysseus. So maybe he has lost his cool and given stuff away, although he doesn't really confirm that and express his name yet. So maybe there has been a slight slip, or maybe now that Odysseus has received the kleos he feels he deserves, maybe now he feels he's proved his point, he's become a little less bothered about his identity. There's a lot of different ways of reading Odysseus at this point. So what I would like to do is your second favourite activity, other than tests, which is a timed paragraph. So timed 15-minute paragraph, and it's so important to do this stuff under timed conditions. And the question is, how do the games contribute to our understanding of Phaeacian society? So the events of the games, you know, the discussions, the organisation of the games, the events themselves, the significance of having games, etc., etc., etc. You know, by all means, do a bit of research, assemble some facts before you write this. But once you start writing, I really want you to work under timed conditions. The other reason for this is so that these tasks don't become a mammoth exercise. You know, I don't want you to spend a lot more than you should on lessons and homework. You know, ideally you're doing 9 to 10 hours of classics a week, 4.5 in class, including online classes, and 4.5 in homework. You might not have hit that yet, but we're not far off. And some of you, doing everything very slowly and carefully, that's brilliant. But I know a couple of people are spending sort of 12, 13 hours on classics work, both class and homework. And I'm loath to tell you not to do it, but there's always got to be a slight balance. So for those of you who are spending an hour and a half, yeah, you're at the other end of the scale. Anyway, so off you go, timed 15-minute paragraph. Boom. So what happens next? Well, we get a rather interesting story with Ares and Aphrodite, and it's a tragicomic tale. I'm not going to go into it in complete depth, but obviously Ares and Aphrodite are having an affair, and they're caught by Hephaestus using his cunning mesh or net, and then they're humiliated, and finally Poseidon basically buys their freedom, and Hephaestus releases them, and they scurry off in shame and humiliation. So it is a funny story. You can imagine Ares and Aphrodite, butt naked in a mesh net, sort of spinning around, and all the other gods are walking in and laughing at them, and it's a sort of great physical comedy, if you like. And this is quite an interesting thing for Homer via the bard Demodocus to do at this point. We've had some really quite traumatic scenes. Remember, we started with the first song of Demodocus with Achilles and Odysseus having having a fight and Odysseus bursting into tears, and the tension of the games, and now we've got a bit of relief. So if you keep emotionally harrowing your audience, it loses impact. So here Homer's changing the pace, the tone, and we're having a bit of a laugh. So a good thing to talk through. It does also provide a kind of interesting highlight of the nature of the gods. They aren't these superb and supreme moral beings. They're prone to human passions and flaws and ridiculousness in the same way. And this can again be useful in terms of contrast for highlighting the suffering of mortals. So we've got these gods who are prating around and being a bit sort of silly and absurd and ridiculous in luxury. When Aphrodite's released from the net, she rushes back off to her magic sanctuary on Paphos, where she's given a sort of oil bath and massage and fine clothes and made to feel all right again. Whereas look what's happening in the mortal world. People are dying and suffering, and it's emotionally deeply traumatic. But that trauma and suffering is made even more stark by the ridiculous luxury and silliness of the gods. Now, this story actually has another purpose too, in that it can add significant tension for both Odysseus and the audience. Because what is this story about? Well, it's about marital infidelity. It's about cheating on your partner. And does Odysseus need any reminder of what might be happening back in Ithaca? No, he doesn't. He seems to enjoy this, and there's no explicit mention of Odysseus finding this disconcerting. But certainly to the audience, again, we're reminded, well, Penelope is under threat from the suitors. Marital infidelity is the big issue, the big problem. Is she going to crack? So we're getting that kind of reference back to Ithaca and Penelope's problems through this story. And again, it's interesting. You've got you've got Ares, and you've got Aphrodite, and then you've got the husband who is known for his techne and craftsmanship, who comes back and surprises them and uses the techne to solve the situation. So not dissimilar to Odysseus, perhaps. So anyway, again, and the important thing to remember is you can debate things like that. You can debate the significance of the story. Is it a simple, funny story just to lighten the mood? Is it a funny story that does raise tension for the audience, for Odysseus? Yes, no. Have your own opinions, as long as you acknowledge all arguments. So, well done for doing the paragraph. Go off, get a cup of tea, a biscuit, and come back to book 7. So our next important passage, or rather little series of events to analyse, is just a little interaction with Arete and Nausicaa. So here we start to see the influence of Arete, and also the influence, if you like, of Odysseus's behaviour. So his demonstration of his heroic credentials got Alcinous to increase the level of gifts that he's going to give to Odysseus, but also Arete starts piling on the gifts in her own, of her own accord. As she noticed that Odysseus is a hero, is she attracted to Odysseus? Is there something about his stature and his athletic ability that Arete has sort of slightly fallen for, but can't really express it? Maybe. Or is she just trying to really emphasize the good Xenia of the Phaeacians? So she gives him, a number of quality gifts. She also shows her cunning again in just a little, nice little example where she tells Odysseus that he really needs to keep everything tied up and secured, otherwise it will get stolen on the journey home, which is a bit of it's a slightly weird thing to say, because remember, it's her Phaeacian men who'll be rowing Odysseus home, and there'll be no one else there. So they're not an absolutely flawless society. A little point worth considering. Now, where does Odysseus know how to tie things up in a secure, strange, almost magical knot? Well, learn that from Calypso. So again, another tiny little example of of the cunning of women and their intelligence, and Odysseus's dependence on them. So these are not big earth-shattering things, but they're nice little examples you can slide into essays. We also get an interesting kind of final moment with Nausicaa, if you like. Odysseus has a bath, and he is made more beautiful by Athene once more, and he's sort of spied on by Nausicaa, which is no comment. She's clearly interested in him. She finds him attractive, although I don't think she really breaks any significant rules of chastity. And Odysseus speaks to Nausicaa and makes quite a staggering admission. He says that he's going to pray to her every day as a goddess, and he says, "As it was you, my lady, who gave me my life back." So what does he mean by that? Well, one could argue it's the simple xenure of food and clothes and guidance to the palace that allowed Odysseus to survive. He clearly hadn't eaten much for a long time on his raft, and who knows what would have happened to him in Phaeacia if she hadn't helped him out. Perhaps there's something else as well, just the bond of one human with another. Odysseus has sort of understood what it means to be a mortal man again. He's seen Nausicaa and he's felt a bit of love or lust or passion, or she's his first kind of human civilized contact in 7 years, and so maybe that's what he means. You've made me understand what it means to be human again. Interestingly, when Odysseus goes back to Ithaca and he meets up with Penelope, end of the book, spoiler alert, and he retells his tales in part, he misses out any mention of Nausicaa. So is that because he's just trying to save a little bit of time? Is that because she's not significant? Or is there actually something Odysseus doesn't want to acknowledge to Penelope? Possibly. Again, we've got the mystery of truth in the Odyssey. I don't think we could say that Odysseus and Nausicaa have a passionate sort of physical relationship, but do they have a mental relationship? Is there? And some people think that's even worse, mental infidelity. Anyway, that's up to you to decide. So we then get another song of Demodocus, the third song of Demodocus, which is the story of Troy. And this is quite an interesting one for a variety of reasons, because this is very much about the negative consequences of Odysseus's plan to use the wooden horse to get into Troy, and the negative consequences for the Trojans. It's not celebrating the glory of the defeat of the Trojans, but the suffering and the horror of war, which is quite strange in a sense, because you'd have thought in a work about heroes it would be emphasizing the kleos rather than the consequences. And throughout the Odyssey we actually see this idea of kleos as the most important thing to heroes being challenged. Now maybe it reasserts itself at the end, but it is certainly challenged throughout, the importance of kleos and the nature of heroism. So we get on line 522, while the famous minstrel was singing, Odysseus's heart was melting with grief and his cheeks were wet with the tears that ran down from his eyes. He wept as a woman weeps when she throws her arms round the body of her beloved husband, fallen in battle in the defence of his city and his comrades, fighting to save his city and his children from the evil day. So a very, very interesting simile. So this is clearly referring to the Trojan War, and the husband and wife being referred to are Hector and Andromache. Hector, the leading Trojan hero, who fights very much out of a sense of duty to his city and to his family, and takes on Achilles in the final battle, motivated by those more modern values than Achilles' single-minded heroic thirst for vengeance and kleos. So even though Hector's on the losing side, in many ways actually he is considered by some to be the evolution of the hero from the focus on the individual to the focus on the city and his duty to others. And many have said in Homer this represents the transition from these individual kingdoms in the Greek world to these city-states where you have governing councils and even democracies in the case of Athens, where it is about your duty to the city rather than your kingdom's duty to you. So it's argued that the Odyssey is a story of this transition. So, it's surprising, as I've sort of said, because this is the consequences of Odysseus's actions. This is almost a kind of is it a critique of his actions? This is, the husband and wife dying and the sack of the city and the trauma. This is all caused by Odysseus. His horse, his plan, his idea. He did this. So quite a strange and interesting thing to finish on. And Odysseus' response is, in a sense, informative. He is sobbing and weeping and breaking down again. Now, why? Are we being too modern in our interpretation of this? Is he sobbing and breaking down again because he's being reminded of his kleos, his identity, his heroism, his friends who are dead? He doesn't really know who's alive anymore. He's got a great idea of who's dead because he saw them in the underworld. Spoiler alert, but that's yet to come. So, an interesting thing to finish on, and again, more echoes of the Iliad, more intertextuality, drawing us back into the world of Homer's Iliad whilst reading or listening to Homer's Odyssey. Lovely. So, what I would like to do now is watch the Masslit clip below, and I've put in the link, and apologies if you have to type it. I'll try and attach the link to the lesson as well. And this is something that we need to get good at, and something we're going to do more of, and that is basically trying to pick out scholarly opinions, because you will have to use them in some of the longer form essays that you write. They're also just really good for helping you understand the nature of the Odyssey and the values and so on and so forth. So there's a whole variety of reasons why they're extremely useful to watch. So what I would like you to do is watch this video by Professor Jenkins. Try and identify at least 5 opinions that he gives. So academic opinions, so Xenia is absolutely crucial, or heroes are fundamentally changing in nature throughout the Odyssey, or I'm not saying those are his opinions, but those would be academic opinions, and try and find some evidence that actually supports those ideas, because that's what you're going to have to do in the exam. You put forward an academic opinion and then you support it with a little bit of evidence, or if you want to, and I would strongly urge you to, find some evidence that might challenge it. Scholars have a whole variety of different opinions, and you need to have your own, and it's perfectly okay to challenge scholars' opinions of things with evidence, of course. So there we go. That is the a brief kind of run through of some of the key scenes of Book 8. Now, remember, you do need to have an understanding of the bits that we haven't covered. I tried to pick out the most important things and given you a bit of info and talked you through them, but you need to know the whole thing. Excellent. Well done. I will see you in the next lesson.